Do you even know who you're sitting with? The laughter came first, sharp, muffled. The kind people try to hide behind their hands but never really do. Daniel looked up, unsure who the question was for. Across from him, the woman in the navy dress didn't smile. Her fork paused mid-air, her jaw tightening as though the words had been a slap. He blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." She set the fork down carefully. "You're sorry?" The way she repeated it sounded more like disbelief than accusation. Her voice was steady, but her eyes cold, assessing betrayed irritation and something else he couldn't name. At the corner table, 3 men in suits fought to contain their grins. One of them, Greg Pike, lifted his phone just enough for the red recording light to flash. Daniel's stomach sank. The woman leaned back, studying him like a problem she didn't remember signing. "What exactly did they tell you?" "That this was a date." His voice was small now. "They said you—" Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. "Enough." She turned sharply toward the laughing table. The sound stopped on command. Every executive there suddenly remembered their drink. She faced Daniel again, and for a long second they just stared, 2 strangers caught in the same cruel joke. "You work for Ellison Financial," she said, voice low. "Custodial staff, correct?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm Miranda Ellison." The name hit him harder than the laughter. He'd seen it on the building, on the reports he wiped off glass tables every night. The realization burned. They had set him up to be mocked in front of the woman who owned the company. For Miranda, the humiliation twisted differently. These were her people, her executives, treating another human like sport. Across the table, Daniel rose, his face pale. "I should go," but she stopped him, her words tight as wire. "Sit. Let's give them a better ending than the one they planned." And just like that, the power shifted. 2 wounded strangers bound by the same moment of quiet defiance. The laughter never returned. Daniel Porter lived in patterns. The same shift, the same bus, the same quiet hallway hum after midnight when the office towers turned from boardrooms to mausoleums. He liked it that way. Predictable, clean, uncomplicated. The world didn't notice him, and he had stopped expecting it to. Every night he pushed his cart down glossy floors that reflected everyone else's success. The name badges on the doors he wiped were worth more than his monthly rent, but he never complained. Work was work. It kept the lights on and the refrigerator full for his son Jamie. Jamie was 16, all restless energy and unspoken questions. He'd grown up faster than Daniel wanted. Too fast, really. Most evenings by the time Daniel came home, Jamie was already asleep. School books scattered across the table. Mornings were their overlap, brief but warm. A shared breakfast of burnt toast and cheap coffee. A few exchanged jokes, a half hug before school. It was enough, Daniel told himself. It had to be. His apartment was small, but it was theirs. The walls still carried faint pencil marks from when Jamie was little, each line labeled with his height, and the year scribbled beside it. His late wife, Sarah, had written those numbers. Her handwriting, looped, gentle, was still there, ghost-like, refusing to fade no matter how many times Daniel repainted. Sarah had been the bright one, the talker, the teacher. She'd believed in second chances for her students, for her husband, for everyone. When she got sick, Daniel believed too. But belief hadn't saved her. He'd sat by her hospital bed, promising Jamie that everything would be okay, until the machines went quiet and that promise died in his throat. Since then, he hadn't made promises, he made routines instead. At work, people called him Porter, or just "Hey Janitor." He didn't mind, titles didn't bother him, tone did. The way some of the younger executives smirked when they passed, their jokes dressed up as compliments. "How's the hardest working man in the building? Bet you know all our secrets, huh?" He'd smile, nod, and keep wiping. His wound wasn't just the loss of his wife, it was the slow erosion of dignity. The years of being invisible until someone needed something cleaned. The quiet humiliation of pretending not to hear laughter when he entered a room too soon. That night, the prank had torn open something deeper. He'd seen it coming in flashes before. Greg Pike's smirk, the sudden friendliness, the suspicious invitation. But he wanted to believe someone could see him differently, even for a night. Across the city, Miranda Ellison's morning began in silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that came after too many late nights and too many ignored messages. Her penthouse windows looked out over everything she'd built, the skyline she'd clawed her way into, the empire her name anchored. People called her decisive, brilliant, intimidating. No one called her kind. She'd stopped expecting that long ago. Her driver spoke only when spoken to. Her assistant filtered every human interaction into calendar slots and legal memos. The only person who still looked at her without calculation was her daughter, Ava. Ava was 10, quiet, analytical like her mother but softer in spirit. Miranda saw herself in the girl's concentration, how she'd sit cross-legged on the floor building elaborate Lego structures and narrating whole stories in whispers. But even that connection was fading. Lately, Ava had stopped talking as much, her sentences shrinking to nods and gestures. Miranda told herself it was just a phase, that children changed like seasons. Still, every morning when Ava packed her backpack in silence, Miranda felt a pinch of guilt, the same guilt that had followed her since the divorce. The nights missed, the recitals skipped, the calls answered too late. She'd traded time for success, and won the wrong prize. At work she was a force, no one questioned her. Meetings bent around her tone, even board members adjusted their breathing to her rhythm. Yet, the higher she rose, the smaller her personal world became. Her assistant once joked that Miranda probably had her emotions itemized in a spreadsheet. Miranda had smiled, but the truth stung. Her life had become a machine, productive but hollow. The loneliness she carried was disguised as efficiency. She knew her reputation. The Ice Queen, they whispered. She let them. It kept the world orderly, predictable, until that night. When she'd walked into the restaurant, she expected another hollow conversation. An investor, a strategist, perhaps a lonely executive. Not this. Not a setup. The laughter from her peers had been a knife she didn't see coming. For the first time in years, she'd felt something sharp shame. The memory replayed on a loop the next morning as she sat in her office, staring at her reflection in the black glass of her computer screen. She should have fired them all on the spot. Instead, she felt tired. Tired of the culture she'd allowed. Tired of the kind of success that celebrated cruelty. Her phone buzzed with calendar alerts she ignored. In another tab, a report about janitorial staffing budgets blinked open, showing Daniel Porter's name on a payroll list. She didn't know why she searched it. Maybe to make sense of what had happened. Maybe because for one brief moment the night before she'd seen something in that man's eyes that wasn't fear. It was decency. Daniel spent that same morning trying to wash the humiliation off his skin. He told Jamie nothing. Just that work was fine, that he might skip dinner to pick up an extra shift. But the truth sat heavy behind every word. When Jamie left for school, Daniel lingered at the kitchen table, his hands around a cold mug of coffee. He remembered the way the CEO had stopped him from leaving, how she'd said, "Sit. Let's give them a better ending." That sentence wouldn't leave his mind. Two people on opposite ends of a system built on titles and control, both quietly broken in their own ways. Neither of them knew it yet, but that shared wound, the hunger to be seen, to be respected, to feel human again, was about to pull their worlds together in ways neither expected. And the joke that started it all was far from over. Miranda didn't sleep that night. The laughter from her own executives kept echoing in her mind, not because it was loud but because it was hers, her people. She'd built Ellison Financial on merit, discipline and reputation, yet beneath the glass and steel, rot had set in, arrogance disguised as humor, cruelty disguised as culture. By morning she had already decided how it would go. The meeting room felt colder than usual. 10 senior managers sat around the polished table, fidgeting as Miranda entered. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Quiet anger always traveled farther. "I watched grown men mock an employee in public," she said evenly. "A man who works longer hours than any of you, who cleans your messes so you can walk through clean hallways, pretending this company is flawless." Greg Pike, still confident from the previous night's drinks, smirked faintly. "It was meant to be lighthearted, Miranda. A joke." "No, but..." Her gaze cut him off. "A joke," she repeated. "At whose expense?" No one answered. She turned to the group. "That man has a name. Daniel Porter. I suggest you remember it, because the next time you forget, your resignation letters will be waiting for you." Her voice never broke. When she dismissed them, no one spoke on their way out. But by the time the doors closed, every corridor of Ellison Financial already knew what had happened. The CEO had defended the janitor. Daniel heard it third hand from the security desk. He'd come in early, avoiding eye contact with anyone who recognized him from the restaurant incident. His plan was simple: keep working, stay invisible, let time bury the shame. But whispers traveled faster than mops. By the time he reached the 38th floor, he could feel the stares. "Porter." He froze. The voice came from behind him, calm, distinct. Miranda Ellison stood by the conference room door, one hand in her pocket, the other holding a folder. "I need a word." Every instinct told him to refuse, but she'd already turned and walked inside. He followed, careful to keep distance. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish, his work from the night before. The irony wasn't lost on him. Miranda didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, she chose a chair halfway down, motioning to the one across from her. "Sit, Mr. Porter." He hesitated, then obeyed. "I owe you an apology," she began. "What happened last night was inexcusable. It won't happen again." Daniel nodded once, unsure what to say. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm not finished." She folded her hands. "I'd like to make it right. Join me for lunch today." He blinked. "Lunch?" "Yes. My treat." The suggestion landed like a stone in still water. A CEO inviting a janitor to lunch. It didn't fit anywhere in the social architecture of the building. "With respect, ma'am," he said slowly, "I don't think that's necessary. You've already said what needed saying." Her expression didn't change, but her tone softened. "It's not about necessity, it's about decency." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse again. Lunch with the CEO would only paint a bigger target on his back. People already whispered. The men who mocked him would see this as another reason to laugh. But pride, the quiet kind that had kept him standing all these years, told him to accept. He didn't want pity, he wanted equality, even for 1 hour. He nodded. "All right." A flicker of something relief maybe crossed her face. 12:30. The executive lounge. When he left the room, the receptionist's eyes followed him like he'd just walked out with state secrets. Within an hour, gossip had replaced fact. By noon, the entire building buzzed. Some said he'd threatened legal action. Others claimed she was grooming him for a PR stunt. One rumor even suggested they'd known each other before. Daniel ignored it all. He worked through the morning with his usual precision, emptying bins, restocking supplies, fixing a leaky faucet in the finance break room. Every now and then, someone would pass a too casual remark. "Big lunch plans, Porter," or "Don't forget your napkin, boss might need it polished." He didn't rise to the bait. Years of quiet dignity had trained him not to. At 12:25 he washed his hands twice, ran a damp comb through his hair, and buttoned his cleanest gray shirt. He'd never eaten in the executive lounge before. Most employees hadn't. When he arrived, Miranda was already seated at a corner table near the window. The skyline behind her was a silver blur. She'd changed into a lighter blouse, softer than her usual boardroom armor. He stopped at the entrance. "Ma'am, maybe I sh—" She gestured for him to sit. "Daniel." "Not ma'am. Not today." He sat, keeping his hands folded in his lap. "I appreciate this, but you don't have to go out of your way." "Maybe I do," she said. "If I expect others to treat people better, I have to start somewhere." The waiter approached, nervous and overly polite. It was clear he'd been warned who she was. Miranda ordered something simple, a salad and coffee. Daniel just asked for water. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Around them the room hummed with the discomfort of hierarchy being dismantled in real time. "You have a son, don't you?" Miranda asked suddenly. Daniel nodded. "Jamie. 16. Smarter than me, which is inconvenient." That drew a small, genuine smile from her. "And your wife?" He looked down at his hands. "Passed away. 5 years ago." The air shifted. Miranda hesitated, realizing the line she'd crossed. "I'm sorry." He shrugged lightly. "Life keeps moving. You just try to keep up." She watched him, studying the steadiness in his voice. There was no bitterness, only weariness. "You don't seem angry," she said. "Most people would be." "I don't see the point," he said. "Anger doesn't clean floors or pay bills. Besides, people show you who they are. You just have to decide what that means." That answer sat with her longer than she expected. Outside the glass, the city pulsed with motion. Inside, a strange calm settled between them. Two people used to control, but for entirely different reasons. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. "I meant what I said earlier. This company owes you respect, not apologies." Daniel gave a small nod. Respect is enough. When they stood, the lounge fell silent again. He could feel the stares, some curious, some mocking, most confused. He ignored them all. Miranda didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and simply refused to care. By the time he returned to his cart, word had spread across every floor. The janitor had lunch with the CEO. Each retelling grew louder, more distorted, feeding an office obsessed with hierarchy. Daniel didn't know it yet, but that single act of civility, a meal shared between two lonely people on opposite ends of a building, had just set an invisible chain in motion. For Miranda, it was about decency. For Daniel, dignity. For everyone watching, it was a story waiting to explode. And somewhere between rumor and reality, something small but powerful had begun to change. The building hummed with gossip before Daniel even clocked in. The air itself felt charged like static before a storm. People had always ignored him before. He preferred it that way, but now every hallway seemed to narrow when he walked through. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter restarted the second he passed. It started small. A smirk here, a comment there. "Hey Porter, how was the power lunch?" one of the finance analysts called out as he filled his coffee mug. "Heard the stakes? They're when you sit with royalty." The others chuckled. Daniel kept his eyes on his mop bucket. "I had a salad," he said simply. That only made them laugh harder. By mid-morning, the whispers had shape. A photo had surfaced, grainy, taken from across the executive lounge. It showed him sitting across from Miranda Ellison, her hand mid-gesture, expression unreadable. Out of context, it looked intimate. Too intimate. Someone had captioned it on an internal group chat, "When the janitor cleans up more than the floor." Within hours it had spread beyond the company's walls. A gossip site that followed corporate scandals reposted it with the headline, "CEO, or Cinderella. Sources say Ellison's lunch companion isn't what he seems." Daniel didn't even have a social media account, but he didn't need one to feel the fallout. Management called him in before lunch. The facilities director, a tired man who hated confrontation, cleared his throat and closed the office door. "Look, Porter," he began, "you've always done solid work here. No issues. But this situation, it's drawing attention. Not the good kind. Maybe just keep a lower popola for a while, yeah?" Daniel frowned. "Lower than mopping floors?" The man sighed, looking uncomfortable. "You know what I mean. Stay out of sight. Don't make it worse." It wasn't anger that Daniel felt. It was the dull, familiar sting of being reminded where he belonged. Meanwhile, upstairs, Miranda faced a different kind of inquisition. The board meeting that afternoon had been scheduled for quarterly projections, but no one cared about numbers. "Optics, Miranda," one member said bluntly. "You can't afford to look unprofessional right now. The market's watching. The press is sniffing around after that photograph." She leaned back in her chair, voice calm. "It was lunch. That's all." A senior partner adjusted his glasses. "The janitor? It sends the wrong message. People are calling it erratic, emotional. You can't be seen mixing professional lines, especially not with staff that far below your rank." Below your rank. The phrase tasted metallic. She'd spent her entire career fighting men who measured worth by hierarchy, and now she was defending a basic act of decency as if it were scandal. "He's an employee," she said. "He was humiliated by this company, and I corrected it." That's not what the narrative says. She looked around the table, faces she'd once trusted now looking at her like a liability. Then maybe the narrative is the problem. No one replied. Silence filled the room, thick with corporate cowardice. By the time the meeting ended, she knew what they expected. Distance. Disavow him. Issue a statement. Bury the story. She refused. But the decision came with a price. Clients called her office, asking if she was in a stable headspace. A PR consultant suggested a short vacation to reset the narrative. Even her assistant spoke in a new tone, careful, measured, as if talking to a loaded weapon. Downstairs, Daniel's shift had turned heavy. Every sound grated: the squeak of the cart wheels, the hiss of cleaning spray. He overheard two interns near the elevators. "She's lost it," one whispered. "Dating the janitor? It's like some twisted charity case." He wanted to say something, anything, but what could he prove? Every word would sound like excuse or fantasy, so he kept walking. When the elevator doors opened, Miranda was inside. For a second, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. She finally spoke. "You've seen it?" He nodded. "I have. I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. You didn't take the picture." "But I caused it," she said quietly, "by thinking decency could exist here without being weaponized." He studied her face. She looked tired. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from realizing your values are starting to cost you everything. "I don't blame you," he said. "I've been the punchline before. I'll survive." Her expression softened. "You shouldn't have to survive it." The elevator stopped. The doors opened, but neither moved. For a moment they stood suspended between two floors, two worlds that didn't know how to meet without breaking something. When he finally stepped out, he said without turning, "They'll drag you down with me if you're not careful." She answered, voice low. Maybe that's what it takes to clean this place. The doors closed between them. By evening, the pressure reached its peak. A journalist called her assistant asking for comment on the janitor scandal. The company's legal team drafted statements without her approval. Daniel was quietly reassigned to night shift on another floor until things cooled off. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like exile. When he got home that night, Jamie was on the couch scrolling through his phone. "Dad," he said slowly, "is this you?" The photo was on the screen. The same one. Captioned, "Mock." Daniel took the phone and set it face down. "Don't believe everything online." "Are you in trouble?" He forced a small smile. "Nothing I can't handle." But when he stepped into his room and closed the door, the facade cracked. For years he'd lived quietly beneath notice. Unseen. Unharmed. Now visibility felt like exposure, and every act of dignity came with punishment attached. Across the city, Miranda stood by her window, overlooking the skyline, phone buzzing with unanswered messages. The laughter from that first night echoed faintly in memory. But now she wasn't sure who the joke was on anymore. For both of them, the cost of one simple meal had just become painfully clear, and the fragile bridge they'd built was already burning at both ends. Daniel's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but he was already awake. Sleep had become an empty habit. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the same questions, the same look in people's eyes, the same looping thought. Why did I ever think I could belong in that room? He dressed quietly so as not to wake Jamie. The boy had asked too many questions the night before, his voice careful, the way kids talk when they know something's wrong but aren't sure how much truth they're allowed. "Everything's fine," Daniel had said. It wasn't. Outside, the air smelled like rain, thick and metallic. The streets glistened, each puddle reflecting headlights and city noise. Daniel walked instead of taking the bus. He needed the distance, the space between home and humiliation. When he reached the building, the security guard gave him a hesitant nod. Normally, they'd exchange a few words about sports or the weather. Not today. Today, even friendliness had become a liability. The new shift assignment sent him to the sub-basement level. Storage, maintenance, no contact with office staff. The kind of work they gave people they didn't want seen. He didn't argue. He just pushed the cart through narrow halls that smelled of bleach and dust. Every squeak of the wheels echoed like an accusation. The rhythm of cleaning used to calm him. Wipe, rinse, repeat. But now it only reminded him of the difference between order and peace. The floors could shine, but nothing inside him felt clean. By mid-morning, the familiar heaviness had settled into his chest. The humiliation wasn't just public. It was intimate. He'd thought for a second at that table that decency could still exist across class lines, that maybe she of all people had seen something more than his uniform. He'd been wrong. Now the rumor had transformed kindness into scandal, and he, as always, had become the collateral damage of other people's narratives. He tried not to think about Miranda, but she was impossible to erase. Every corridor, every polished surface, reflected some version of her composed, unreachable, powerful. He wondered if she regretted the lunch, or if she'd moved on like everyone else in her world seemed to do. When his shift ended, he stayed longer than he needed to, polishing the same brass handle until it gleamed. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about control. The one thing still. Back upstairs in an office wrapped in silence and tension, Miranda Ellison stared at her muted phone. The PR team had taken over everything. No statements, no interviews, no comments. The official line, Ellison Financial declines to discuss personal matters. Personal, the word disgusted her. What they called personal was actually human. But she'd built her career on eliminating the human part, keeping everything clean, logical, efficient. Now that very perfection had become a cage. Her assistant entered quietly, dropping off a folder. "These are the revised talking points for the investor call." "Thank you." "Also," the assistant hesitated, "there's still chatter about the photo. HR says they're handling it." Miranda's tone was sharp. "Handling who?" "Porter." She exhaled through her nose, slow and heavy. "Of course." When the door closed again, she stared at the city below. From this height, people looked like static, tiny, interchangeable. It was easy to forget that every window held a life with its own gravity. Maybe that was the problem. Somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that the people who kept the lights on had hearts, not functions. But remembering didn't make her any freer. The board's message had been clear. Stay quiet, stay clean, stay untouchable. She'd spent 2 decades perfecting that silence, and for the first time it suffocated her. That night she returned to her penthouse and found Ava asleep on the couch, a blanket half pulled around her. The TV glowed faintly with a paused cartoon. Next to the remote lay a tiny drawing stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a blue sky. A crooked heart floated above them. Miranda sat down slowly, studying the drawing. Her daughter's artwork had always been a quiet mirror. Once, all her pictures had been of houses and stars. Lately they'd become emptier, objects without people. This one felt like a small rebellion against that loneliness. She wondered what kind of world her daughter would grow up in, if people like Greg Pike were the examples she left behind. She'd punished no one yet. Firing them now would look reactionary, emotional, precisely what the board warned her against. Still, every instinct screamed for justice. She thought of Daniel, how calm he'd been even while humiliated, how he'd never raised his voice, never asked for pity. There was a dignity to his silence that contrasted painfully with her own corporate one. His quiet meant integrity. Hers meant compliance. The difference stung. Meanwhile, in his small apartment, across the city, Daniel sat by the kitchen window, the city glow casting lines across his face. Jamie's door was closed. The faint sound of a video game leaked through. He should have been angry at the executives, at the gossip, even at Miranda. But what he felt instead was emptiness. He reached for the small wooden box on the counter. Inside were keepsakes from a life that no longer fit. A photo of Sarah, a folded hospital wristband, and a letter she'd written before the end. The edges were worn from being unfolded too many times. He read the same lines he always did. Don't close yourself off, Danny. The world can hurt, but it can also heal. Don't stop seeing the good. He closed it quickly this time. The words hurt more now, because he'd tried. He'd tried to see the good and got crushed under the weight of its consequences. Outside, thunder rolled softly. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke, rain tapping against the window. He watched the drops race each other down the glass, merging and vanishing like lives colliding and disappearing again. Back in her penthouse, Miranda stood by her own window, watching the same storm. For a fleeting second, she wondered if he was seeing it too. Two lives separated by miles and money, yet somehow moving through the same silence. Her reflection in the glass looked foreign, tired eyes, hair pulled loose, the mask of control slipping. For the first time in years she allowed herself to whisper the truth aloud, even if no one could hear it. I'm sorry, she said softly, to Daniel, to herself, to every version of her that had forgotten what empathy sounded like. The rain answered with its own rhythm, steady, relentless, cleansing. Down in his apartment, Daniel stood, poured himself a cup of cold coffee and turned off the light. He didn't pray, but he did something close to it. He hoped, not for forgiveness or fame, just for the noise to stop, for the world to quiet long enough for him to breathe without shame. In two different rooms, two people stared out into the same storm, each trapped in the prisons they'd built, the janitor in invisibility, the CEO in perfection. Both had defended something human and paid for it. And yet beneath all that silence, something stubborn remained, a pulse neither of them could name. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was alive, and it was waiting. The hallway was empty except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of Daniel's mop sliding across tile. Weeks had passed since the scandal, but time hadn't softened anything. The photo had faded from the news cycle, sure, but not from memory. For the company it was old gossip, for him it was a scar that refused to fade. He worked the janitorial wing now, a quiet exile in the building's underbelly. Fewer eyes, fewer whispers. That suited him fine. The nights were predictable again, stripped of drama, just the way he liked it. He'd stopped wondering if he'd ever see Miranda Ellison again. Their worlds had reset to their natural order, hers above the glass ceiling, his below it, until the sound of heels broke the silence. He looked up, half expecting a manager with another complaint about streaked floors. Instead, she was standing there, the CEO of Ellison Financial, far from her marble office, out of place in a corridor that smelled of detergent and metal polish. Mr. Porter. Her voice was steady but quieter than he remembered. He straightened slowly, gripping the mop handle. Ma'am. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The fluorescent light did neither of them any favors. She looked tired, human, the crisp perfection of her boardroom presence replaced by something rawer. I'm sorry to interrupt your work, she said. I wasn't sure you'd even still be here. He wiped his hands on his uniform. I'm hard to get rid of. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's good. We need people like that. He didn't reply. I came down here because there's something I didn't say, she continued. Something I should have said weeks ago. He leaned the mop against the wall, folding his arms. You already said it. In your office, in front of everyone. I'm sorry. I said it as your employer, she said quietly. Not as a person. He said nothing. Silence stretched between them. Uncomfortable but honest. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. After that photo, after the board meeting, I let them silence me. I told myself it was strategy. Damage control, whatever excuse made it sound less like fear. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of being judged for doing something decent, and I'm ashamed of that. He studied her face, searching for the distance he remembered, but it wasn't there. She wasn't performing. You don't owe me anything, he said. You don't need to come down here to clean your conscience. Her expression didn't change. Maybe not, but I need to say it anyway. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Apologies are words. Words don't fix much. She nodded slowly. Then maybe I can start with something else. Without waiting for permission, she reached for the mop. Ma'am.
Miranda,
She corrected softly. And yes, I know how to use one. I cleaned my college dorm every week for 2 years. You don't have to. Maybe I do, she said. He hesitated, then stepped aside. She dipped the mop into the bucket and began to work the floor with awkward, deliberate movements. The rhythm was uneven, too fast, too careful, but she didn't. Daniel watched in silence. The CEO of a major financial company scrubbing tiles under the same lights that made his skin look gray was a sight he never thought he'd see. When she finished one small section, she leaned the mop against the wall and exhaled. That's harder than I remembered. He allowed the faintest smile. You missed a spot. She turned, spotted it, and laughed softly. Perfectionist habits die hard. Something in that moment cracked, not wide but enough for air to pass through. He took the mop from her and wrung it out again. You really didn't need to do that. I know, she said, but I needed to look you in the eye without feeling like a hypocrite. He resumed mopping. You're not the first person to feel bad for me. Most people just do it from a distance. This isn't pity, she said, firm now. I don't pity you, Daniel. I respect you. I think I did from the start, even if I didn't understand it. He kept working, his movements slow, measured. Respect doesn't change much around here. It should, she said. It will. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who'd once been carved from steel now stood in front of him, stripped of armor, uncertain but sincere. You don't get it, he said quietly. I can't afford to believe in people like you. Not anymore. She didn't flinch. Then believe in this moment instead. No cameras, no board, just two people trying not to be defined by what others think of them. The words landed heavier than she meant them to. He stopped mopping. The silence between them shifted again. No longer sharp but fragile. Finally he said, if you really mean that, then stop apologizing. Just treat people better. That'll do more good than words. Her eyes softened. I can do that. For a while they just stood there, listening to the hum of the lights and the faint drip of the mop bucket. Miranda brushed her hands together, leaving faint traces of water on her palms. I'll make sure they leave you alone, she said. He shook his head. You don't need to protect me. Maybe not. But I can make sure no one else has to go through what you did. He met her gaze. There was no pretense now, no power play, just two tired souls on opposite ends of the same ladder, realizing the rungs weren't as far apart as they'd been taught. Thank you, he said finally, not for the apology, but for showing up. Miranda nodded once. Thank you for not throwing me out. He smiled faintly. I thought about it. That made her laugh again. A real laugh this time, warm and unguarded. When she left, Daniel watched her go, the sound of her heels fading down the corridor. For the first time since the scandal, the air didn't feel heavy. He looked down at the half-cleaned floor, the bucket of gray water, and the mop leaning against the wall. Two people had stood there, one stripped of power, one stripped of pride, and somehow, between them, they'd managed to wash away something more than dirt. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. And in that quiet hallway with nothing but the hum of the lights for company, Daniel realized beginnings often sound like silence. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. The first time Miranda appeared in the maintenance wing after that apology, she brought a clipboard. Routine inspection, she told anyone who asked. No one questioned her. She was the CEO, after all. But the lie was so thin it was almost honest. Daniel didn't call her out on it. He simply nodded when she walked by, continued his work, and kept the conversations short. She didn't push. Instead, she made a habit of showing up once a week under some practical pretense. I need your input on supply costs. Could you explain the maintenance schedule again? We're reviewing cleaning contracts. Each visit ended up lasting longer than the reason she gave. It became a pattern, an unlikely friendship disguised as professional curiosity. She'd stand beside him while he refilled buckets or checked equipment, asking questions that started with logistics and ended in philosophy. What do you think motivates people to do their best work? Or do you believe respect can be taught? He always answered with the kind of simplicity that made her stop and think. People don't work for applause, he said once. They work for peace. The kind that comes from knowing you did something right, even if nobody noticed. Miranda had spent her life chasing applause, the measurable kind. Bonuses, awards, headlines. Peace had never made her performance reviews. On her next visit, she didn't bother with the clipboard. You were right, she said, leaning against a wall freshly painted by his crew. Peace doesn't sell, but it sustains. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something you'd put in a company memo. Maybe I will. They began talking more easily after that. She told him about her daughter, Ava, how the girl had stopped talking for weeks, how her silence scared her more than any market downturn ever could. Daniel listened without judgment. Then he told her about Jamie, about raising a teenager who was too smart for his own good, about learning to forgive himself for not being enough of everything at once. Their conversations were quiet but honest, the kind of honesty that doesn't need promises. Sometimes she'd join him on walkthroughs. The first time she held a flashlight for him while he fixed a broken water line, the maintenance staff froze like statues. Carry on, she told them, and they did, awkwardly uncertain whether to look or pretend not to see. Word spread again, but this time it carried a different tone. The CEO was back in the janitor's corridor, not as punishment but as habit. There were no cameras, no PR teams. She didn't issue speeches or memos about company culture. She just showed up. At first, people whispered about it as another oddity. Then something subtle began to shift. A senior analyst started greeting the night staff instead of brushing past them. An HR manager began scheduling feedback meetings with cleaning crews to better align expectations. It wasn't a revolution, but it was movement. For Miranda, it became a kind of therapy she didn't know she needed. The further she descended into the building's lower floors, the lighter she felt. It was as if every flight of stairs stripped her of something unnecessary. Titles, expectations, the invisible armor she'd worn for years. Once, when she arrived late in the evening, she found Daniel sitting on an overturned bucket, drinking coffee from a paper cup. Rough day, she asked. Same as any other. She hesitated, then sat on the bucket opposite him. You ever feel like your job defines you too much? He looked amused. You're asking a janitor that? I'm asking a man, she said. He considered that, then nodded slowly. Yeah, sometimes I think the mop's just camouflage. People look at it and stop seeing the man holding it. Makes life quieter but smaller. Her gaze softened. I know that kind of small. Just with a better view. They shared a brief silence before he added, doesn't have to stay that way. It was a small thing to say, but she carried it with her. Over the next few weeks, their rapport grew into something neither fully defined nor avoided. They still called each other Mr. Porter and Mrs. Ellison when others were around. But when the building emptied and only the hum of the elevators remained, it was Daniel and Miranda. He never flattered her, never pretended she was anything but human. She found that refreshing, even grounding. He once caught her holding a broom absent-mindedly, lost in thought. You're holding it wrong, he said with a grin. She blinked. There's a wrong way to hold a broom? Plenty. That's how you end up sweeping air instead of dust. She laughed, an unguarded sound that echoed down the corridor. It startled him at first, but he smiled too. It had been a long time since either of them had laughed without an audience. The next morning, Daniel found a handwritten note taped to the supply cabinet. There's no wrong way to try. He left it there. Their unlikely friendship became the building's quiet secret. Everyone noticed, but no one dared to comment anymore. The whispers changed tone. Not mockery, but curiosity. Executives started greeting the maintenance staff by name. Someone even replaced the cracked break room kettle without being asked. Miranda's assistant once caught her emerging from the basement corridor and raised an eyebrow. New department? Old one, she replied. I'm just catching up. The more she descended those stairs, the more her leadership changed upstairs. Meetings became less about numbers and more about purpose. She started listening, really listening, in ways that unnerved her board. You're different lately, one partner said during a review. more empathetic. Miranda smiled. We can afford that, can't we? She didn't tell him where it came from. That humility wasn't a brand strategy but a contagion caught from a man who taught her that silence could hold more power than speeches. One night as she was leaving, she found Daniel patching a damaged wall outside the executive elevator. You missed a spot, she teased. Occupational hazard, he said without looking up. I meant me, she said softly. I missed a spot too, in this place. He paused, leaning on the scraper. Then start patching it. She smiled. Maybe I already am. The elevator dinged behind her. She didn't step in right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and handed him something small. A keycard. Access, she said. For the executive floors. You shouldn't need permission to fix what's broken. He stared at it for a moment, then shook his head. That's not going to make me an executive. I know, she said. But it might remind a few of them who really keeps the lights on. He took it carefully, not because he needed it, but because of what it meant. That night, when she reached her car, Miranda realized something unexpected. She no longer felt alone in her own company. Somewhere between the mops and the marble, between apology and respect, she'd rediscovered the one thing she'd buried under ambition: connection. And in the quiet heartbeat of the building, Daniel felt it too. He didn't trust easily, not after years of invisibility. But trust doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it sneaks in through the simplest things: a conversation, a shared joke, a keycard. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not instantly, but undeniably. And everyone who worked under that roof could feel it. The way a building feels the weight of its foundation when it finally starts to settle right. Rumors never needed truth, just fuel, and someone in Ellison Financial had been carrying a full can of gasoline. It began with a single email. Anonymous, but written in the precise tone of someone who knew corporate etiquette. Polite, professional, poisonous. It claimed Daniel Porter had been unduly favored by the CEO after the public scandal months prior, implying she'd rewarded him with pay raises, overtime approvals, and unmonitored access to restricted floors. By noon, that email had been forwarded 6 times, whispered about 100 more. By evening, it reached the board, and by morning it reached her. Miranda was reviewing annual budgets when her assistant slipped a printout onto her desk, voice low. You should see this before the board calls. She read it twice, then once more, slower, the words blurring in her vision. The email wasn't overtly cruel, that was what made it effective. It sounded concerned, responsible, laced with full sincerity. It asked questions without asking them. Was Mr. Porter's influence in operations still appropriate? Were resources being misused? Had professional boundaries been compromised? She could feel the trap closing even before the phone rang. The board meeting was brief and cold. Optics, Miranda, said one of the senior partners, the same man who'd once praised her for being uncompromising. We're not accusing anyone of misconduct, but Petrit matters. The rumor mill's active again. Investors have noticed the chatter. There's no basis for it, she said sharply. Then prove that. Distance yourself from him. For now. He's done nothing wrong. And neither have you, another board member added. But sometimes the narrative writes itself. The more you fight it, the louder it gets. Miranda's hands tightened around the pen she was holding until the plastic cracked. She wanted to tell them what Daniel had done, not for the company but for its soul. She wanted to describe how the culture had softened, how people had begun treating each other like human beings again. But none of that fit in a financial statement. She walked out of the meeting with her spine straight but her chest hollow. Downstairs, Daniel was tightening a leaking pipe beneath the east stairwell when the facilities director found him. The man's tone was neutral, rehearsed, the kind people use when they're carrying bad news but trying to sound kind. Porter, I've got orders from upstairs. They're putting you on temporary suspension. Daniel looked up slowly. Suspension? For what? The director shifted, uncomfortable. Some complaints came through. They're reviewing procedure, that's all. Complaints from who? I don't know. HR won't say. Look, I don't think it's personal. Just stay home for a few days. They'll clear it up. Daniel stood, wiping his hands on his rag. Right. A few days. When the director left, he stayed in the stairwell, staring at the half-fixed pipe still dripping rhythmically. It felt almost poetic. All his work, all his effort, still leaking through cracks someone else had made. By that afternoon, his employee badge had been deactivated. At home, he didn't tell Jamie right away. He needed a few hours to build a version of the truth that didn't sound like failure. He'd already been through that once, when Sarah died, when the hospital bills mounted, when pride had forced him to take the janitorial job just for a while. Just for a while had turned into years. He sat on the couch, the badge still in his hand. For the first time since the scandal, he felt the old humiliation return. The same invisible brand burned into his skin, unwanted, replaceable, less. That night, Miranda couldn't concentrate on anything. Her phone buzzed with messages from HR, PR, and legal, all with the same subtext, contained this. When she finally called Daniel, the number rang twice before he answered. "Daniel," she said, voice low. "Ma'am." The word hit her like a slap. After months of Miranda, he'd gone back to titles. "I just heard," she said. "This wasn't me. I didn't approve the suspension." "I know." His tone was calm but distant. "Doesn't matter who did. The damage is done. They're calling it procedure," she continued, pacing her office. "I can overturn it, but not immediately. The board's watching every move I make." He laughed softly, no humor in it. You don't have to explain, Miranda. I get how this world works. It's not built for people like me." "That's not true." "It is. You just forgot for a while." The words landed heavy between them. She wanted to argue but couldn't, because deep down, he was right. "Please," she said finally, "don't quit. Let me fix this." "Fixing it would mean choosing me over your company," he said, "and we both know that's not happening." "Daniel. Look, it's okay. You tried. That's more than most people ever do. But I've been through enough of these cycles to know how they end." She could hear him moving around, maybe packing. The sound of tape peeling from a box. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Anywhere that doesn't know my name." When the call ended, she stood by her window for a long time, watching the city blur into night. The lights below looked like stars, unreachable, untouchable, fake. The next morning, HR scheduled an internal interview for her. The tone was polite but clinical, every word chosen for legal precision. "Did you ever authorize an unsupervised meeting with Mr. Porter?" "Yes." "Did you initiate these meetings?" "Yes." "For what purpose?" "To understand the people who work here." "Were any of these meetings outside work hours?" "Yes." "Would you consider your relationship with Mr. Porter to be professional?" She stared at them. "I would consider it human." The silence that followed told her everything. Humanity was not on the approved list of company values. By week's end, a memo circulated quietly. Pending investigation, all direct contact with maintenance personnel should be coordinated through facilities management. In other words, she was banned from speaking to him. Daniel didn't show up at the building again. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. The hallways seemed emptier, as if the very air had lost something grounding. The following Monday, Miranda entered the elevator alone. As the doors closed, she glanced at the reflection beside her, the space where he used to stand. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, a woman open in her own success, powerful yet powerless. Her assistant found her an hour later, still sitting at her desk with her coat on. "You're supposed to be in the finance briefing," the assistant reminded gently. "I'm not going," she said. "But the board." "I said I'm not going." When the assistant left, Miranda opened her inbox. Dozens of unread messages, legal updates, investor concerns, press notes. But one new email caught her eye. No subject line, no sender ID. Inside was a single sentence. "Funny how fast you forget who helped you remember you're human." No signature, but she knew. Greg Pike. The same executive who'd started the original prank. He'd struck again, not with laughter this time, but with strategy. She forwarded the email to legal, but she knew how it would go. "We'll investigate. No evidence. Focus on recovery." Recovery. That was what they called silencing now. That evening she sat alone in her car in the underground garage, engine off, phone silent. For the first time she didn't know whether to drive home or walk downstairs to the maintenance floor just to see if he'd really left. But the space was empty now. Just a bucket, a cart, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner. Upstairs, the building continued humming as if nothing had happened. Meetings resumed. Deadlines loomed. The world kept moving. For everyone else it was business as usual. For Miranda it was the end of something unspoken. Something real. She stared at the glass walls of her office, her own reflection splitting into endless duplicates. She'd built her life around transparency, yet somehow lost sight of the truth. He had taught her to see people, and now, without him, all she could see was her own emptiness, reflected back. Daniel spent the next few days packing quietly. He didn't own much. Just boxes of tools, old books, and the letter from Sarah that he still kept in the drawer. When Jamie asked where they were going, he said, "Somewhere new, somewhere simpler." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Because simplicity wasn't what he wanted anymore. He'd had that. What he wanted now was meaning, and he'd only ever found it once in the most unlikely place. On his last night in the city, he took one final walk past the building. The lights in the top floor were still on. Her floor. For a moment he thought he saw her silhouette near the window. He didn't wave. Neither did she. Sometimes goodbye didn't need to be said to be understood. He turned away, pulling his jacket tighter against the wind. Behind him, Ellison Financial shone like a monument, polished, powerful, and utterly hollow. The bridge they'd built had fallen, not from fire or rage, but from the quiet weight of the world pressing down until it cracked. And as he walked into the night, Daniel Porter promised himself one thing. If he was ever seen again, it would be on his own terms. Not as a story, not as a symbol. Just as a man who refused to stay invisible. The truth didn't return with fanfare. It came quietly, like light slipping through a crack no one had noticed before. Her name was Rhea Patel, 22 years old, unpaid intern, invisible to most people in the company, except to Daniel. He'd been kind to her once, months earlier, after she'd spilled an entire tray of coffee across the marble lobby. Everyone else had laughed or looked away. He hadn't. He'd helped her clean it up, handed her a napkin, and said softly, "Happens to all of us. Don't let them make you feel small for it." It was 2 minutes of humanity. But for Rhea, it meant everything. So when the rumors started, when she saw Daniel escorted out like a criminal, when she overheard executives whispering his name with that cruel satisfaction of people who believe they've won, she couldn't let it rest. She wasn't powerful. She didn't have authority. But she had something everyone else overlooked: access. Interns were invisible, and invisibility had its advantages. She worked in the communications department, where digital archives were stored. That meant she had access to the internal footage of employee events, security recordings from common floors, and archived emails for quarterly audits. It was meant to be routine compliance work, dull and procedural. But one night, as she stayed late to finish her backlog, she opened a folder labeled Archive January Incident. Inside, she found everything. The original blind date prank. The executives laughing. The restaurant footage from security cams. One of them had bragged and uploaded clips to internal chat as a harmless joke. The time-stamped emails between Greg Pike and his team planning it all. And finally the new thread, the one that framed Daniel for exploiting sympathy. Her hands shook as she scrolled. It wasn't just a prank anymore. It was a pattern, cruelty disguised as culture. She copied everything onto a flash drive. Then she hesitated. Exposing this meant risking everything. She was an intern. She could be erased before lunch. But when she saw a still frame of Daniel standing beside Miranda at that dinner table, two people caught mid-humiliation, yet defiant, she made her choice. The next morning she drafted an email. No anonymity this time, no fear. Subject: the truth about the Porter case. She attached the footage, screenshots, timestamps, and names. At the top of the list she wrote a single sentence. He didn't exploit kindness. He survived cruelty. She sent it not to HR, not to legal, but to the press inbox listed on the company's website. By noon, the story was live. Exclusive: internal leak reveals janitor's humiliation at Ellison Financial covered up. CEO caught in boardroom power play. It spread like wildfire. The clips of Greg Pike and his team laughing at the setup went viral within hours. Comment sections flooded with outrage. News anchors replayed the footage of Daniel quietly enduring the mockery, his quiet dignity cutting through the noise. And then came the photo, that same one that had once been used to shame them. The CEO and the janitor sitting across a table. But now, seen through truth, it became a symbol. For once the world didn't see scandal. They saw integrity, two people trying to rise above cruelty. Miranda didn't even know about the leak until her phone exploded with messages. Reporters wanted statements. Her PR team was panicking. "We can't confirm or deny anything," they said. But she knew what she had to do. She walked into the boardroom unannounced. Every head turned. Greg Pike was there too, pale and sweating. "Who authorized this leak?" one of the board members demanded. "Do you realize the damage?" Miranda placed her tablet on the table. The paused frame showed Greg's face mid-laugh during the prank video. "I didn't authorize the leak," she said. "But I'm glad someone did." The room froze. This company covered up cruelty. We punished a man for having integrity and rewarded people for deceit. We talk about values, excellence, transparency, respect, but we only practice them when they're convenient. Miranda, careful, one of the partners warned. The press is watching. Good, she said. Let them. She turned to Greg. You framed him once as entertainment, then again as a liability. But the only liability here is what this company becomes if we stay silent. Greg stammered something about context and team culture, but she cut him off. Save it. The world saw your context. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating. Then Miranda spoke again, quieter but firmer. Effective immediately, Mr. Pike is terminated. HR will prepare documents for any staff involved in the cover-up. You can't just one board member began. I just did, she said. When she left the boardroom, she didn't go to her office. She went downstairs. The maintenance corridor was still quiet, still smelled faintly of cleaner. His locker door hung open, empty except for a folded gray rag. She sat on the bench and exhaled. For months she'd tried to balance reputation and truth, and both had crumbled anyway. But now, there was no more balancing act, only honesty left to give. Her phone buzzed again, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. Ms. Ellison? The voice was uncertain. Young. Yes? My name's Rhea. I was the one who sent the footage. Miranda closed her eyes, relief and fear crashing together. You have no idea what you've just done. I know, Rhea said softly. I did it because he once told me not to let anyone make me feel small. I figured he deserved someone to do the same for him. Miranda smiled faintly. Where are you now? In HR, Rhea whispered. They called me for a review meeting. Stay there, Miranda said, already walking toward the elevator. I'll be right up. When she arrived, the HR officer was halfway through a lecture about protocol breaches. Miranda walked straight in. This meeting's over, she said. Ms. Ellison. She did what none of us had the courage to do. She turned to Rhea. You're not fired. You're promoted. Effective today, you'll work in internal ethics and Migmans. You just redefined both. Rhea looked stunned. Are you serious? Completely. When she left HR, Miranda didn't stop walking. Her next destination wasn't the boardroom or her car. It was the press. By the end of the day, she stood in front of microphones, eyes steady, voice calm. Yes, the footage is real, she said. The man in that video, Daniel Porter, was humiliated by members of this company. He was punished for my silence, and he deserves not just an apology but justice. Journalists fired questions. Was she involved? Did she regret defending him? Would he return? She answered all of them with the same line. Sometimes the only way to clean something truly filthy is to face the mess yourself. The clip aired everywhere. The internet, for once, chose compassion. Hashtags trended overnight. Justice for Daniel. Real leadership. Dignity at work. Messages poured in from strangers, janitors, clerks, waiters, nurses, people who'd been invisible all their lives. Each one said the same thing. Thank you for seeing us. Miranda didn't respond to the noise. She only made one call that night. It went to voicemail. Daniel, she said softly, you probably don't want to hear from me, but the truth's out. The whole world knows now, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just, come see what you started. The foundation we talked about, it's real now. I want you to lead it, not because you need it, but because we do. She paused, her voice breaking just slightly. You once told me peace doesn't sell, but it sustains. I finally understand what that means. When she hung up, she didn't know if he'd call back. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel powerless. The damage was real, but so was the repair. The truth had resurfaced, not because of her power, but because of one intern's courage and one janitor's quiet kindness. Sometimes it takes the smallest person in the room to remind everyone else what integrity looks like. And as night fell over the city, a janitor's story had begun to clean far more than just floors. It had started to cleanse a conscience. The auditorium had never been so full. Rows of employees, from executives in tailored suits to custodial staff in gray uniforms, sat side by side under the same bright light. There was no music, no slideshow, no carefully scripted prelude, just a stage, a single microphone, and a silence heavy enough to bend the air. The company called it a town hall meeting. Everyone knew it wasn't. It was a reckoning. At the front row sat the board, stern, guarded, already tense. At the very back, near the exit, Rhea clutched her tablet nervously. Her eyes darted toward the side doors, half expecting Daniel to appear, half fearing he wouldn't. Miranda Ellison stood backstage, staring at the floor-length mirror that reflected every sleepless night of the past week. She could hear the whispers out there, the same voices that once cheered her for record profits, now waiting to see if she would fall apart. She had rehearsed her speech 100 times. Then she tore it up. The truth didn't need a script. A stagehand nodded. "You're on, Ms. Ellison." She stepped out. The murmurs died instantly. Miranda walked to the podium and adjusted the mic, her movements steady, deliberate. She didn't smile. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Today we are not here to discuss numbers or strategy or quarterly goals. We are here to discuss something more important, what it means to be decent." The room stilled. She let the pause stretch long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "A few months ago," she continued, "this company humiliated a man who worked harder than most of us ever will, a man whose only crime was showing up with integrity in a place that mistook cruelty for culture." The first ripple of emotion swept through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "She's talking about the janitor." "Yes," Miranda said, hearing it. "I'm talking about Daniel Porter." Every camera phone in the room lifted. Every heart leaned forward. "Some of you laughed when he was mocked," she went on. "Some of you looked away, and her voice faltered, for the briefest second. I stayed silent. I told silence was professionalism, that ignoring injustice kept things stable, but all it did was poison the very air we breathe here." A pin could have dropped in that silence and sounded like thunder. Miranda glanced toward the door. "Today I'm here to do what I should have done from the start." The doors at the side opened. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Daniel entered, wearing his gray uniform. He didn't walk fast or hesitate. He just moved with quiet steadiness, eyes forward, posture upright. No one told him where to sit, because he didn't. He kept walking, down the center aisle straight toward the stage. Miranda stepped aside as he joined her under the lights. For a moment they stood there together, the CEO and the janitor, the top and the bottom of the hierarchy now sharing the same floor. "I invited Mr. Porter here today," Miranda said, "not as a gesture, not as damage control, but as an act of accountability." She turned to him. "Daniel, on behalf of this company and personally, I am sorry. You were treated as a punchline, a prop, and later as a threat. You were suspended without cause and shamed for your integrity. I failed you and this organization failed you." Her voice broke slightly but didn't waver. "That ends today." She looked back at the audience. "Effective immediately, Daniel Porter is reinstated with full honors and benefits. More than that, he will serve as the director of the Maya's Voice Foundation, a new branch of our outreach division dedicated to providing therapy and career rehabilitation for working-class professionals and their families." Gasps filled the hall. People exchanged stunned looks. Even the board members couldn't hide their shock. Miranda continued, her tone sharpening with conviction. "You see, somewhere along the way, we began confusing wealth with worth. We decided that a person's value could be measured by a title or an office view. We taught ourselves to look down at the hands that clean our desks, fix our systems, serve our food, and call that ambition. It isn't." She stepped away from the podium now, pacing slowly. "Respect is not a ladder you climb. It's a floor you stand on. And today, I want everyone in this room to remember that." A faint, hesitant applause began from somewhere in the middle. It grew, spreading like a pulse until the entire hall filled with the sound. Miranda turned back toward Daniel. "I can't erase what was done, but maybe you can help us rebuild what we broke." Daniel stood there for a moment, hands clasped, head bowed slightly. When the applause quieted, he stepped toward the microphone. He didn't look comfortable under the lights, but his voice, when it came, carried the calm weight of truth. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he said. "I just wanted to do my job and go home with enough left in me to make my son proud." He glanced at the crowd, executives, analysts, janitors, guards, all of them listening, some for the first time. "I've been cleaning this building for years," he continued. "I've seen people treat each other like machines, all speed, no soul. I used to think that's just how the world worked. But then someone showed up here and reminded me it doesn't have to." His gaze shifted to Miranda briefly before returning to the audience. "You all talk about work ethic and excellence, but the truth is, excellence doesn't live in corner offices. It lives in effort, in the people who show up even when no one's watching. The ones who fix what others break, quietly, without applause." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. "You can't build anything real on arrogance. It cracks under pressure. But dignity, that's solid. You can build a whole life on that." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a voice from the back, The same maintenance supervisor who'd handed him his suspension notice whispered, "He's right." Others followed. Heads nodded. The silence turned electric. Daniel took a breath. I forgave the ones who laughed a long time ago, not because they deserved it, but because holding on to hate feels heavier than a mop bucket. A few people chuckled softly through tears. I'm not angry anymore, he finished. I just hope the next time you see someone you think is beneath you, you remember that the floor you're walking on, someone had to polish it first. He stepped back. The room erupted. It wasn't thunderous at first, more like a wave building, but soon every person was on their feet. The sound rose higher and higher until even the glass walls seemed to tremble. Miranda blinked back tears. This wasn't the polite applause of corporate events. It was something older, purer. Relief, redemption, recognition. Daniel turned to her, offering a small nod. She returned it, her throat too tight for words. In that moment, the company hierarchy that had defined them for years, the invisible walls between staff and executive, important and replaceable, cracked open and fell. When the noise finally subsided, Miranda raised a hand. Before we end, she said, I want to introduce a phrase you'll start hearing around here. It's simple, respect first. It'll be our new policy, not written on posters or websites, but she gestured toward Daniel. He'll help us make sure of that. The room cheered again. As people began to leave, many stopped to shake Daniel's hand. Some apologized quietly, others simply thanked him. Even those who once mocked him couldn't meet his eyes without shame. Ria approached last, smiling nervously. You don't know me, but I do, he said, recognizing her from the email she once delivered. You were the intern. She nodded. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you taught us, even the things you didn't mean to. He smiled gently. And thank you for reminding them what truth looks like. Behind them, Miranda watched, her expression a mix of pride and humility. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy lingered. Something had changed. Not just a headline, not a gesture, something fundamental. Miranda turned to Daniel as the lights dimmed. You realize what just happened? He chuckled softly. You gave a janitor a microphone. The world's never quite the same after that. She smiled through her tears. No, it isn't. For the first time in her career, she didn't feel like she'd led a company. She felt like she'd joined one. And as the last of the employees filed out, Daniel lingered on stage for a moment longer, looking at the mop-shaped reflection in the polished floor. Once, that reflection had been all he was. Now it was just where he started. He looked up at the empty seats, the echoes of applause still hanging in the air. Respect first, he whispered, testing the words. They sounded right. And in that vast hall, the same place that had once been filled with laughter at his expense, the janitor who refused to bow his head finally stood taller than anyone ever had. Spring came quietly, the kind that seeps in rather than arrives. The building looked the same, steel glass, too bright in the mornings, but something within it had shifted. Daniel Porter now walked those halls not with a mop, but with a clipboard and a purpose. Facilities coordinator, the new title read. He smiled every time he caught the reflection of it on his badge. It wasn't about rank, it was about recognition. For the first time, his work had a name that matched his worth. The janitorial wing, once ignored, was now a hub of new ideas. Young employees, interns, assistants, even analysts came to him for advice. He taught them simple lessons: how to fix a jammed door, how to talk to people with respect, how to leave a room better than they found it. It's not about cleaning floors, he'd say. It's about leaving behind something better than before. They listened, and they meant it. Miranda Ellison's leadership changed too, though she never talked about it publicly. She no longer led from the boardroom but from the hallways, spending 1 hour every week walking the building. No assistants, no entourage. She called it the ground hour. She spoke to receptionists, drivers, cleaners, interns. No cameras, no speeches, just presence. Her new initiative, the Dignity Program, was now company-wide. Every employee, regardless of position, received the same respect policy, the same training, the same invitation to speak. On the front page of the company website, under the logo, was a new tagline: Respect first. It wasn't branding, it was belief. Sometimes when she passed the maintenance floor, she'd find Daniel surrounded by staff, explaining how small actions keep big systems alive. He still wore the same practical clothes, though now he carried himself like someone who finally understood the quiet power of being seen. They often had coffee together on Friday mornings. No agenda, no pretense. Just two people sitting across a small table talking about work, life, their children, or nothing at all. You ever miss it? She asked once. The quiet nights when it was just you and the mop? He smiled. Sometimes. Back then the floors listened better than people. She laughed softly. Now they all listen to you. He shook his head. No, now they listen to themselves. That's the real change. It was true. The same executives who once whispered behind his back now greeted him in elevators. The same guards who once waved him through without a glance now stopped to chat. Not because he was higher on the ladder, but because the ladder itself had changed shape. People no longer looked down at him. They simply looked at him. One afternoon, Rhea came by his office carrying a small plaque. It read, "For changing the culture, one act of kindness at a time." He laughed when he saw it. "I didn't change anything," he said. "You did." Rhea smiled. "We all did. You just started it." When she left, he set the plaque on the shelf next to a folded gray rag, the same one he'd left in his locker the day he almost quit. That night, as the office lights dimmed and most people went home, Daniel lingered a little longer, walking the halls. Everything smelled faintly of lemon polish. He thought about how strange it was. The same scent that once meant invisibility now felt like purpose. Down the corridor, Miranda's office light was still on. He could see her through the glass, smiling as she worked. Different worlds once. Now, just different roles. The janitor and the CEO, both healed, both seen, both human. The gymnasium was packed with proud faces, flashing cameras and the smell of fresh flowers. Banners hung from the rafters. "Class of 2025, the future begins here." Daniel sat near the middle rows, his tie slightly crooked, his palms pressed together as he tried to stop them from shaking. On stage, rows of graduates waited in neat lines, each holding their moment between who they were and who they were about to become. When the announcer called Jamie Porter, Daniel stood instinctively, applause bursting from his chest before anyone else had time to react. His son crossed the stage, smiling wider than Daniel had ever seen. For a second he looked out at the crowd and found his father instantly. Daniel nodded once. Pride didn't need words. As Jamie accepted his diploma, Daniel's eyes caught something at the far corner of the bleachers, a familiar figure, quiet and composed, her hands folded in her lap. Miranda Ellison. No bodyguards, no fanfare, no press. Just a friend who kept her promise. After the ceremony, when the crowd spilled out into the sunshine, Jamie found his father waiting by the gate. "You didn't cry, did you?" he teased. Daniel grinned. "Just allergies." Jamie laughed, then hugged him hard. "You did it, Dad. You got me here." Daniel shook his head. "No, son. We got here, you, me, and a few good people who remembered what it means to care." Jamie didn't fully understand, not yet, but one day he would. A few steps away, Miranda stood watching them, her smile soft but distant. She didn't want to intrude. This was their moment. But when Daniel finally turned and saw her, he waved her over. "You made it," he said warmly. "I said I would," she replied. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Jamie looked at her curiously. "You're Miss Ellison, right? From Dad's work?" Miranda nodded. "From our work. But you can call me Claire." He grinned. "Thank you for everything you did for him." She shook her head. "He did far more for me." For a moment, the three of them stood together in that golden afternoon light, past, present, and future all framed in quiet gratitude. No titles, no debts, just people who had chosen compassion over pride. As they talked, students passed by in caps and gowns, families taking pictures, children laughing. The world felt gentle again, or maybe it had always been gentle, just hidden under too much noise. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sky turned amber, Daniel sat on the empty bleachers, watching his son and friends take photos on the field. Miranda joined him, sitting without a word. He broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think people like us didn't change the world." She tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "No, I think the world changes every time someone decides to do one decent thing." She nodded, her voice soft. "Small kindnesses ripple. That's how legacies are built." They watched in silence a while longer. The sound of laughter drifted through the air. Finally, Miranda stood. "You'll come speak at next month's foundation launch, right? Only if you promise not to give me another title," he said. She laughed. "No titles this time. Just stories." He smiled. "That I can do." When she left, Daniel stayed seated, his gaze on the horizon. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't look intimidating. It looked earned. He thought about the path that had brought him here, The humiliation, the silence, the apology, the healing, and he realized something simple but profound. The smallest acts of decency can rewrite destinies. A kind word, an apology, a second chance. They're the quiet gears that turn the world forward. He whispered to himself, respect first, then stood and walked down to meet his son. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to remember that kindness still matters. Tell us where you're watching from, and one word that describes how this story made you feel. Let's fill the comments with respect, compassion, and humanity. Respect first, kindness wins.